My name is David. I'm 28, and if there's one thing my childhood taught me, it's that some kids are born into families where love is evenly divided, and others are born into families where love comes with a measuring stick. In my family, the measuring stick always tilted toward my sister, Rachel. If you've ever lived in the shadow of a golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one showered with praise and gifts while you were left to scrape for scraps, you'll understand this story. Stay with me, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Hit like, and tell me in the comments, who was the favorite child in your family, and how did it shape you? Rachel was 2 years younger than me, but she might as well have been royalty. On her 16th birthday, she got a brand new car, red, shiny, with a ribbon tied around the hood. On mine, a sweater 2 sizes too small, and a reminder to be grateful. When she struggled in school, tutors were hired. When I asked for help, I was told to work harder. When she wanted to go to Europe with her friends after graduation, my parents paid for the whole trip. When I asked to go on a simple weekend camping trip with buddies, I was told there was no money to waste. It wasn't just the big things, though. It was in the little moments. At dinner, when Rachel walked in late, the whole table paused for her. When I came home with good grades, my father barely looked up. She was the light of their eyes, and I was the steady shadow no one noticed. As we grew older, the gap widened. Rachel lived recklessly, flitting from job to job, knowing there'd always be a soft landing. My parents poured money into her every whim. Rent, car repairs, even business ventures that fizzled out within months. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs through college just to stay afloat. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their gifts, their attention, their endless approval. I was stronger for earning everything myself, but deep down, a bitterness grew. When Grandma passed, that bitterness turned to something sharper. She and I had always been close. Unlike my parents, she saw me, not Rachel's shadow, not the responsible one who needed less. Just me. She'd sit with me on her porch, tell me stories from her youth, ask me about my dreams. She had a way of making me believe I mattered. So when she died, I clung to one thought. At least she had seen me. At least she had understood. But then came the will reading. And once again, my parents said the same words I had heard my whole life. Rachel was left everything. You nothing. The will reading was held in a stiff, airless office with wood-paneled walls and a clock that ticked so loudly it felt like it was mocking me. My parents sat up front, Rachel beside them, her posture loose, almost smug, as if she already knew what was coming. The lawyer read through the allocations in a monotone voice. Bank accounts, bonds, jewelry, all listed neatly, all directed toward my parents or Rachel. The Maple Avenue property, Rachel's. The antique car collection, Rachel's. Even the old family silverware, the kind passed down for generations, Rachel's. And for David, the lawyer's voice trailed, eyes scanning the page. There are no specific items or allocations noted. Rachel's lips curved into a satisfied smile. My father gave me a quick, almost pitying look, and my mother put her hand on Rachel's arm like she was already celebrating. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face still. No one was going to see me break. Afterward, as the family filtered out, Rachel walked past me, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Guess Grandma just loved me more, she said, her voice low but sweet, as if she was offering sympathy. The glint in her eyes betrayed her. I clenched my jaw and didn't answer. For weeks afterward, the flaunting began. Rachel started hosting dinners at Grandma's house like she had owned it all along. She posted photos online, captioning them with lines like, "Thanks, Grandma, for believing in me." My parents chimed in, always quick to praise her. Meanwhile, I was the invisible man at the edge of the room. At one dinner, Rachel toasted, lifting her glass high, to Grandma for giving me the future she knew I deserved. Everyone raised their glasses. No one looked at me. But bitterness has a way of sharpening your senses. And as I sat quietly in those rooms, I began to notice small details that didn't add up. First, it was Rachel's words. Grandma believed in me. The thing was, Grandma had never really been close to Rachel. They had tolerated each other, sure, but I couldn't remember a single afternoon where Rachel sat on that porch swing with her the way I had. Rachel never listened to her stories, never cared about the family's history. Why, then, would Grandma leave everything to her? It was my parents. They spoke too quickly, too firmly, whenever I asked about the will. My father once snapped, "It was her decision, David. Let it go." My mother wouldn't meet my eyes, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. And then came Aunt Margaret. We were sitting in her kitchen one evening when she looked at me over her teacup and frowned. "It doesn't make sense, David. Your grandmother always said the house was meant for you. She told me more than once. She said you'd take care of it." My chest tightened. She never mentioned Rachel. "Not once," Aunt Margaret said. She thought Rachel was careless. She hesitated, then added, "David, are you sure you saw the will yourself?" The truth was I hadn't. I had sat there listening, too stunned, too numb, to ask for proof. My parents controlled the documents, and the lawyer had read aloud from the copy they'd provided. I went home that night with questions buzzing in my head. I thought of all the afternoons with Grandma, her voice steady as she told me stories about the family. I thought of the way she pressed my hand and whispered, "You matter, David. Don't ever forget that." She wouldn't have left me nothing. She wasn't careless, and she wasn't cruel, which meant there was more to this. Something hidden. And if my parents and Rachel were so eager to convince me otherwise, maybe they were hiding it on purpose. The thought settled into my chest like a spark waiting to catch flame. The thought gnawed at me until I couldn't sleep. I lay awake night after night, staring at the ceiling, Grandma's words replaying in my head. "You matter, David. Don't ever forget that." If she meant it, if she truly saw me the way I believe she did, then there had to be something more. Something my parents had deliberately buried. So one evening, when I knew Rachel was busy showing off her new house to friends, I drove to Grandma's place on Maple Avenue. My parents had given her home keys to Rachel, but I still had my old copy. The brass was worn from years of use, but it slid into the lock as if the house itself remembered me. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. Rachel had already redecorated, new throw pillows, modern art on the walls, but the air still smelled faintly of lavender, the scent Grandma always loved. My chest tightened as I stepped inside. I didn't come to wander. I came with purpose. The study was exactly how I remembered. Heavy curtains, rows of books, the oak desk that had always seemed too big for the room. I sat down in the chair, running my hands over the wood. I remembered sitting on her lap here, listening to her scribble letters to cousins and old friends. I remembered how she'd tap the desk with her fingers when she was thinking. I pulled open the top drawers, stationery, envelopes, a stack of unpaid bills from years ago. Nothing unusual. I opened the side drawers. Ledgers, recipe cards, even one drawer filled entirely with buttons. Still nothing. But then, as I pulled at the bottom drawer on the left, I noticed it didn't slide smoothly. It caught halfway, resisting as if something blocked it. I tugged harder. It wouldn't budge. Leaning closer, I noticed a tiny keyhole tucked into the side of the drawer's frame, almost invisible unless you knew to look. My heart thudded. Grandma had always carried a ring of keys on a little brass chain. I remembered hearing it jingle in her pocket every time she walked through the house. Rachel used to tease her about being paranoid. I used to think it was just habit. I searched the desk, then the shelves, until finally, in the bottom of an old cigar box, I found it, a small brass key, worn smooth. My hand shook as I slid it into the lock. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a manila envelope, thick and carefully sealed. Across the front, in her handwriting, was my name. I sat frozen for a moment, staring at the letters. My name, written in her familiar looping cursive. When I finally tore it open, the first thing I saw was a letter. "David, if you are reading this, then what I feared has happened. Your parents have never seen you for who you are. They will not protect your place in this family. That is why I have left this for you." I swallowed hard and read on. Enclosed is the true copy of my will, signed and notarized. The Maple Avenue house belongs to you, and to you alone. I trust you will protect it. Do not let them erase you, David. You matter. My hand shook as I unfolded the next pages. Legal documents. A notarized will. My name printed clearly, leaving no room for argument. It wasn't just a keepsake. It wasn't just a token. It was proof. I leaned back in the chair, the papers trembling in my grip. For weeks, they had looked me in the eye and told me I was left with nothing. They had lied. They had celebrated Rachel. They had mocked me. But the truth had been here all along, locked away in a desk, drawer they never thought I'd check. I slid the documents back into the envelope, tucking it carefully into my jacket. My pulse raced, but my mind felt clear for the first time since Grandma's funeral. They thought I was invisible. But at the next family gathering, when I laid these papers on the table, the only ones invisible would be them. The next family dinner was at my parents' house. They insisted on hosting, as if control over a dining room table could somehow extend to control over the truth. I drove there with the envelope tucked safely inside my jacket pocket, its weight a constant reminder that this night wasn't just about food or pleasantries. It was about drawing a line. When I walked in, Rachel was already holding court in the living room. She lounged on the sofa, a glass of wine in hand, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation. Grandma always said I had potential, she was telling Aunt Linda. I guess she knew I'd make the most of the house. Aunt Linda gave her a polite nod, but I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. She knew the truth of what Grandma had said, and now I carried proof of it. Dinner was served on the long oak table. The plates clattered, conversation flowed, and laughter filled the room. Thin, forced laughter. I ate little, my mind focused on the envelope. Every few minutes, I caught my father glancing at me, sharp and suspicious, like he could sense the shift in me. My mother avoided my eyes altogether, busying herself with pouring drinks and refilling dishes. Halfway through the meal, my father raised his glass. To family, he said, and to Rachel, for carrying forward your grandmother's legacy. Glasses clinked. Rachel smiled sweetly, soaking in the attention. I'll take good care of it, she said, her eyes flicking toward me. I know it must be hard for David, but Grandma wanted me to have the house. She trusted me. The smugness in her tone was the final straw. I set my fork down, the clatter sharp in the sudden hush. That's interesting, I said evenly, because that's not what Grandma's will says. The room went still. My aunt froze mid-sip. My cousins leaned forward. My father's glass hovered halfway to his lips. Rachel laughed, a short, dismissive sound. David, please. We've been through this. The will was read. You got nothing. I reached into my jacket and placed the envelope on the table. Its thud echoed louder than it should have. No, Rachid. What was read was a version of the will, the one you wanted everyone to hear. But Grandma left me this, her signed, notarized copy, and it names me as the sole beneficiary of the Maple Avenue house. Gasps rippled around the table. My mother's face went pale, her hand trembling as she set down her wine glass. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Aunt Linda reached for the papers as I slid them across the table. She read quickly, her eyes widening. It's here, she whispered. David's name is right here. This is valid. The murmurs grew louder. My cousins exchanged looks, some shaking their heads. My uncle muttered, so they lied. Rachel shot to her feet, her face flushed red. This is ridiculous. Grandma loved me. She wanted me to have it. Then why, I said calmly, did she hide this in a locked drawer addressed to me by name? Rachel sputtered, her eyes darting to our parents. My father opened his mouth, but no words came. My mother pressed her lips into a thin line, her gaze fixed on the table. The room shifted. The approval and admiration they had expected turned into doubt and disgust. Relatives whispered, their faces hardening as they looked at my parents and Rachel. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. For weeks, you let me believe I was left with nothing. You lied to my face, and you let her gloat. I glanced at Rachel. whose smugness had drained away. But the truth is here. Grandma trusted me, and she was right not to trust you. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier above the table. My father's hand clenched around his glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. My mother stared down at her plate, her lips pressed together, the color drained from her face. Rachel stood rigid, her eyes darting wildly as though she might still find a way out of this. It was Aunt Linda who broke the silence. She placed the papers back on the table with a soft but deliberate motion. "This is clear," she said, her voice firm. "Your grandmother named David as the rightful heir. She wanted him to have the house. There's no mistaking her intent." Uncle Robert leaned forward, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You all knew, didn't you? You let us believe otherwise. You let David sit here, thinking he was forgotten, while you paraded Rachel as the heir." He shook his head. "Shameful." My cousins whispered among themselves, their eyes full of judgment. I could feel the tide of the room shift. Where there had once been unquestioned support from my parents and Rachel, now there was scrutiny, anger even. Rachel slammed her hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "This isn't fair. Grandma always said I was special. She wanted me to carry the family forward. That house was supposed to be mine." I met her gaze, calm and steady. "She said a lot of things, Rachel, but she never said that. Not once. She knew who would take care of her legacy. She trusted me, not you. And she left proof of it." Her face twisted, her mouth opening and closing without words. My father finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "You think this makes you better? You think holding a piece of paper makes you worthy of this family's respect?" I held his stare. "No, living the truth does. And that's something you've all forgotten how to do." Murmurs of agreement stirred at the table. The relatives who had once stayed silent now turned their disappointment on my parents. Years of favoritism, years of lies, it all unraveled in front of them. My mother's shoulders slumped. She whispered, almost to herself, "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." I stood, sliding the envelope back into my jacket. It happened exactly the way Grandma intended. She saw through all of this long before I did, and she trusted me to make sure the truth was known. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was my parents and Rachel who sat in the silence, stripped of their performance. They had nothing left to say, nothing to stand on. I left soon after, stepping out into the cool night air. For the first time since Grandma's funeral, I felt light. Not because of the house itself, but because her voice had been honored. Her will had spoken for her, and it had spoken for me. A few days later, I walked through the front door of the Maple Avenue house, not as a visitor, not as the forgotten son, but as the rightful heir. The lavender scent still lingered faintly in the air. I sat on the porch swing, the same one where she used to tell me stories, and whispered into the night. "I kept your promise, Grandma. They couldn't erase me. The house wasn't just mine. It was ours. A legacy she'd built and trusted me to carry forward. And no matter how hard they tried, my parents and Rachel couldn't take that away. They thought I was invisible. But in the end, they were the ones left unseen. If you've ever had to stand up against the very people who should have supported you, you know the satisfaction of finally being heard. Subscribe to this channel. Hit like, and tell me in the comments, at what moment do you think my family realized the truth had already slipped out of their control?